Hello everybody, welcome to the Peculiar Adventures podcast. This week we're going to be discussing the topic of speedrunning. I'm Shane, I'm here with my co-host Ali.
Hello everyone.
And we're here with our guest today, also Shane.
Hello, I'm also Shane.
Is there anything you'd like to tell everybody about yourself, Shane?
Yeah, well, so I guess I can just give a little bit of background about what I know about speedrunning.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I think that's a little bit about why we're talking about this. So, I've been speedrunning for a long time. God, it's hard to remember how long. Maybe probably 6 years. So, I started with Mirror's Edge, and I ran that game for a while. I'm not amazing at it. I'm about 35th on the leaderboard, I think. Which, just to give some perspective, it doesn't sound very impressive. I probably invested about 700 hours into that game.
Jeez.
I think that's my time on Steam. So, in order to get a real competitive time in a game like Mirror's Edge, I would say is, if I wanted to get 10th place, I would probably be at least 1,500 hours.
Oh my god.
Probably, maybe closer to 2,000.
So you'd have to more than double.
Yeah. So, and this isn't really uncommon when we talk about more advanced games like this. So, and just to say, I haven't just played Mirror's Edge. I think I've run 4 or 5 games. I do have world record in a game that no one else runs, so that's cool.
What game is that?
It's a game called Death Squared that I speedrun with my girlfriend.
The name sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I've never heard of it, so...
Yeah, it's... Please feel free to learn the run and join, because I would like more people to compete with that.
Compete with you and your girlfriend.
Yeah. So, in addition to that, I think the main thing people think about, probably people who are outside of this speedrunosphere, as I call it, I just made that word up. The main thing people think about are events like GDQ, is my guess. I've never attended a GDQ, but I have been to a similar event that's held in Europe. It's called the European Speedrunning Assembly.
Oh, okay.
I've been to the 2017 and 2018 ESAs. So there I actually didn't do runs, but I did commentary with some of my friends. And in addition to that, we've held some marathons on ESA's channel. So shout outs to ESA, they're really, really cool. And essentially what we did for that was we raised money to help our friends go. So I think we call it Hackathon because it's named after one of our friends. And essentially in Hackathon 2018, they actually raised money to help me go to ESA. So that was really awesome. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
That's
So
really
I've done a couple of online runs, like for online marathons, but
one where they aren't all like in one central location.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just sitting in my house in my underwear.
The optimal speedrun environment.
I would, if I did a real speedrun in a physical place, I would be in my underwear too.
And do you still frequently stream your speedruns, or do you do most of it just kind of like without streaming it?
Yeah, so I've been speedrunning a lot less recently. I've had like less time. That being said, most of what I do, so I speedrun, you've probably heard of this game, Battle Block Theater. Yeah, I do the co-op category for that game.
Oh, okay.
And generally, I play with my friend from Germany. We've got a great internet connection, if you can tell. And generally, we play that game once a week. So,
Okay.
But other than that, I've kind of been out of practice for a while.
Gotcha. Yeah, I do love Battle Block Theater. I specifically know it for being a Behemoth game, as well as Stamper does a voice in it.
Yeah.
Actually, the voice in it, pretty
The
much.
voice.
Yeah, he's the announcer and everything. So it's always like cool to see people who are present online. I guess like I've known Stamper for a while for just like animation and other stuff. I used to I pay attention to like the ONING crew and all the people that were like involved with him, Psychic Pebbles and those. And Stamper was like pretty present with them, and then seeing him work on video games and doing voices and stuff.
That's cool.
Is cool. He's starting to do stuff in animation too, where he's doing voices for that as well. So I hope that goes far for him. Yeah, I mean, my experience with speedrunning is exclusively just, like, watching speedruns. Like, I've seen some GDQ stuff, and then occasionally I'm, like, on a nostalgia trip, and I'm like, let's see if somebody speedruns this game I used to like when I was a kid, like Bomberman Hero, or Bomberman 64, or, like, Mario 64 is always fun to watch.
Yeah.
I tend to like to watch 100% speedruns more so than I like to watch, like...
Any percent
speedruns, because I like to see how people navigate through the game in its entirety as quickly as possible to achieve all the goals, instead of like how easily they can break the game to to try and just get to the finish fast enough, which is always really cool to see. But yeah, I don't have too much experience with it beyond that, and I don't really know that much about like how it interacts with games and like coding or anything like that.
Yeah.
Ali has more knowledge in that.
Well, I remember that. I don't even remember how I came across speedrunning as a term, because before, I remember like being a kid on the internet and not really going to many places. But one place I would go to all the time is I was super obsessed with Metroid as a kid. And the site I was probably on the most was Metroid 2002, which was an early place that hosted speedrun strats for the Metroid games that were out at the time. So Prime was new at that time, and Metroid Fusion. And then they also hosted a lot of, the previous games in the series, like a lot of Super Metroid stuff. And I remember following that site, like, until the release, like, through the release of Prime 2, Prime Corruption, always having... I remember watching just the individual strats, like, that's where I learned about some of the tools that are used in the Metroid Prime speedrun of ghetto jumping and scan dashing and all of the, like, important pieces of tech that are used in it. And seeing if like newer games would have that, because they started patching that stuff out in later versions of even just Prime, and then of course the later games didn't really have it, but had other like broken strats and stuff to use. And from there, I didn't really follow speedrunning for a while until just a few years ago when some of our mutual friends would introduce me to speedrunning, and then I started watching like every GDQ, finding whatever speedrunners I liked, and just watching their Twitch chats, watching their attempts and stuff. And then Summoning Salt has a really good, video series of going into like the history of specific games. Usually they're 80% categories, but sometimes they're different categories. And it's a really cool, comprehensive look on an entire game. So that's basically my extent of like speedrunning knowledge.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, probably my introduction to it was just either like meeting people who were super excited to watch GDQ and being like, what is GDQ? And like having no idea what it is. Or just like, because I was starting to get into esports and stuff, so I was starting to get into like the spectating of games, because I wasn't really like a big Let's Play watcher. So like esports was what started getting me into watching game content, and like, I would watch professional strategies and the ways that people like do things at a high level competitively for player versus player games. And then that got me seeing, the competitive formats of non-player versus player games of like speedrunning and how to efficiently get through things and do things most optimally in other games that don't involve, playing against other people.
Yeah. No, I do think it's interesting that you draw a parallel between speedrunning and esports. Partially because like there's definitely some contention in the community where it's like there isn't necessarily a thought that we can look at these as the same sort of thing. But yeah, I think like most people have seen speedrunning in general just from GDQ. It's like that's how you get introduced, And it's really, really, really interesting because there are so many people that watch GDQ, and then if you look at almost any other marathon, if you look at speedrunning streamers, there's a huge fall off. Yeah. But there's lots of people who come around for GDQ and then like disappear until the next one.
Yeah. There's a couple people I keep up with. I think there's like Fuzziness, I think is the name. Yeah, that's one that I like watch occasionally when
Fuzziness is cool. Yeah,
I'm just hanging out and I'm like, I'll just throw on a stream and watch this. It's I do see like GDQ has tons of viewers, and I go to watch like them and they have like maybe 40 viewers at a time. Yeah, and those are like the more popular ones. Like I don't see a ton of.
Yeah, so there are some like Trihex comes to mind of someone who sort of he does a lot of speedrunning, right? But now he's kind of moved to more casual content, but even then he usually could pull about 1,000 viewers.
Yeah.
But it does seem like really what drags people into a speedrunner is the personality rather than that's not always true. There's a guy, Distortion, who I think, well, I don't want to I find it entertaining to watch him, so I don't think he has like a bad personality or anything, but I don't think that's necessarily always the forefront of his content. Yeah. And basically all he does is speedrunning stuff, and he usually gets about 400 viewers.
Well, there's a good portion of people that like, esports pulls in a lot of viewership in the fact that like people will watch a player just because they are an esports player. Like they'll watch somebody because they know they're one of the best people at this video game.
Right, exactly.
And that pulls a lot more viewership than like somebody who's the best at speedrunning a specific game, because I guess like I think there's just a larger audience for esports than there is necessarily for speedrunning, and speedrunning is more like for a lot of people it's not something that they want to do, because so when you watch somebody do a speedrun, you're watching like somebody do this thing that you don't plan on ever trying to do, and you're like, that's really cool. when you watch an esports player play a game, oftentimes that's a game that you play and you're trying to emulate what they do to get better.
I could see that.
Yeah, so like I think it's partially because it's easier for someone who plays a PvP game to try and emulate the professional players to get themselves to be better at it than for somebody who just likes a game to go watch a speedrunner who speedruns it and be like, oh, I wonder how they do this.
Right.
So there is that kind of like disconnect there, I think, but I do think speedrunning should have more of a viewership. I think it's very cool, and I would like it to be more popular. But that's not something any of us can control.
Right. Well, and I do think it's kind of interesting, right? Because in a player versus player sort of game, generally the main thing you're fighting against is another person, right? And obviously, you play a lot of Dota. Yeah. There's a lot of mechanical struggles sometimes. It's not a mechanically easy game to play.
Yeah.
And probably, like, for really new players, a lot of learning the game is learning how to beat the mechanics, right?
Yeah.
But at a certain point, you get to a point where you're playing against another person, and that's the focus of the content there.
Yeah.
But for speedrunning, that's never the case, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big distinction, is I might be able to look at a game and say, wow, I could get better at this forever, but for a lot of people, it's like, well, why do I care? Because I'm not really proving anything to myself. I think to some people it means less.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, because like when you're doing a speed run, it's if you do things the same way, you will get the same result.
Right.
Yeah, there should be no difference in result unless there's RNG focused in that
Of
specific
course.
portion. Like
Yeah.
I know that like what Battletoads has like certain segments of it that have like really RNG and people hate them because again you can screw over your run just because of chance.
Right.
And while instead of like a player versus player thing, you can't know what another person's gonna do. You can make assumptions and guesses and try and be predictive of what they're gonna do and know what's the most optimal thing to do in that situation, but you can't guarantee that's gonna happen.
Right.
So
yeah. And if something goes wrong in a speed run, a lot of the time what most people want to do is just start over.
Yeah.
Whereas like you're playing a PvP game, you're not just going to quit because you made one small mistake.
Well, some people will.
Some people will. Yeah. I think the general person though,
Yeah, most people will keep going, yeah.
And I think that aids to what makes spectating a speedrun less interesting is like, do I really want to sit here and watch this guy start over on the first level for an hour?
Especially games that have a really intensive or like super well optimized like first part.
Super Mario Bros.
Yeah, Super Mario Bros. A lot of NES games really, like Castlevania 1.
Yeah.
Like they call the first stage in Castlevania like a jail because there's so many like micro optimizations that you need to do if you want to even get a world record on it.
If you don't even attempt
if you
to
mess
get
up
near it,
one of the many frame perfect things in it, then you might as well just restart the run.
But I do think that sort of brings me to another point that I think is really interesting, which is like, because a lot of what we see and like what a lot of what you talk about in speedruns is getting the world record or what's the world record or having the world record.
Yeah.
That's what people look at, right? And it's like, oh, do I want to watch this guy? Does he have the world record? It's like that matters a lot to people. And it's really funny because I think a lot of the time it doesn't matter. It's like it's the whole point of it is about having fun, right?
Yeah.
And I got to be honest, you're not going to get a bunch of money if you get a world record.
Yeah.
Trust me, I know.
It's
sadly.
it's just self-accomplishment more than anything.
Yeah, and it's just about having fun.
Yeah,
right? Like at the end of the day for competitive games, some people might continue to play despite the fact that they don't like the game anymore because it's a job.
Yeah.
Right? Which, I mean, kind of sucks now that I've said it out loud.
I mean, but well, there's a lot of people like that. That's always been one of the biggest things that has like deterred me from the idea of like being a streamer is if you're a streamer for a specific game, you have to keep playing that game or you're not going to have an audience anymore. Like you have somebody like Donkey, the YouTube creator, who hit that point of popularity where he was so big that he realized I can stop playing League of Legends, which was one of his big audience pieces, and I will still be popular enough. I won't lose enough of my audience to matter to me per se that I can keep going and keep having this as my career. Where somebody like who's just known for one type of content, like for instance, if Purge Gaming, the Dota personality, if he were to just stop making Dota content, nobody would watch anything else he does. That's what he does. He doesn't do anything else. There's a lot of stuff like that with like Hearthstone streamers, League players, like all of these people where they can try and go to a different game. I mean, some of them will try to do that. I saw like Dyrus, who used to be a League of Legends streamer, was like playing Dota for a while, and like he might do that a little bit, but I'm pretty sure predominantly most of what he streams is still League of Legends because that's what people know him for.
Right.
So you have that issue where like the game isn't something you like anymore; it's your job.
Yeah.
And that's never something I would want to happen with a game.
No, that sounds terrible. Well, and there are people who I know who speedrun who like treat it like that, and it's like they'll get home from class and they'll play it all day every day, and it's like that blows my mind.
Yeah.
To some of them, it's fun. Like I
Yeah.
know the guy who held the Mirror's Edge world record for 2 years with a ridiculously good time. It only got beaten recently. He would get home from school and he would play Mirror's Edge all day until he went to bed, and he would do that every single day, and it made him incredibly good at the game. He is he is amazing at that game, you know. But for me, that's not why I'm in it, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't think part of it was wanting the world record, right?
Yes.
But it's not like someone got the world record and he got all upset about it. It was a lot of I think this is the interesting thing that people don't realize is like a lot of why world record matters is because it's cool to see the game get better, regardless of who you are. Like, I'm not upset that I have the 35th place in Mirror's Edge. You know, I'm more upset that the game I have first place in, no one else runs. Because you can't see how cool it could be.
Yeah, and that's something that's always interesting is seeing those, seeing people discover things that the community didn't know about until a certain point. That's like a huge point where everybody's like, oh, we can implement this into our runs now, and like this changes everything. And though that kind of reminds me of is like when a multiplayer game gets patched.
Right.
When like suddenly everything gets turned on its head and you have to try and figure everything out again.
There's a discovery period.
Yeah, there's a discovery period, and like speedrunning does have that, especially the larger speedrunning communities when they finally discover like something that nobody knew about the game, and everybody has to implement that into their runs. So I was curious was there anything that you discovered specifically in any of the games you run?
Not anything like super fancy. Yeah, obviously in the game that I'm the only one who runs it, I've discovered things.
Yeah.
The people who play Mirror's Edge are super talented and they're really good. That's this sort of game where there's a million different options in every scenario, and one of the things that I think is really cool about that game is you can pick 2 different routes that look completely different but sort of end up being the same time.
Yeah.
Right? And like when you get to really optimized times, you have a optimized route. But there's lots of players who are constantly finding faster ways to do things. I'm not one of those people, though. So I was going to mention, though, maybe a month ago, people found out a way in Majora's Mask to warp to the moon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which has been... Oh, that game came out 20 years ago, and it's crazy that people are just finding this stuff now. And we've also just seen Wind Waker barrier skip this same year.
Oh, okay.
Which is insane. It's actually unbelievable.
It really is.
Yeah. You find out... Okay, so a game I've ran a little bit. I had a terrible time in it, right? But I learned the run and I played it for a while. Jedi Academy is...
I love that game.
It's an awesome game, right? It's a really, really technical speedrun. So sort of the main movement component of that game is... it has bunny hopping, essentially, right? But the way it works in Jedi Academy is in order to bunny hop, they tried to patch it out, but they failed, essentially. So the way that it works is if you go from a higher point of elevation to a lower point of elevation, you can bunny hop. So the routes are optimized around going to slightly lower elevation to keep building up speed. But if you ever go up higher elevation, you lose your speed, right? So they're really interesting routes. But at the same time, in the past 2 years, they've discovered a bunch of weird things about this game. Something called crouch boosting, which I can't really go into details, but it sort of breaks what I just explained, which was a really cool part of the game. It introduced a bunch of new routes, essentially, right? And there's another thing they call it spin to win. But essentially, when you get the lightsaber new mode, you can pick fast. And for whatever reason, if you're using the fast mode and you keep swinging your lightsaber, you don't have to go down in elevation. You can just bunny hop everywhere. And they found that out 2 years ago as well. But really recently they found something called, I think it's called stab launches. And essentially there's this stabbing animation you can do on enemies, right? So normally it's fine. Everything works fine with it. But there are specific ways to essentially trick the game into thinking that your enemy is someone else during the stab. And if it does, it'll try to bring you to that person when you do the stab, right? So... and I can maybe send you some clips of it that you can put in. But if one way to do it is you'll throw a grenade up in the air, and if you time it correctly, you'll do the stab, and the grenade will explode as you're doing it. And what will happen is that grenade will be marked as your enemy and then be gone, which will set your enemy to the 0 position on the map.
Yeah.
So on some maps, this will just send you flying in a certain direction. Lots of really cool stuff. And it's interesting, too, because when that sort of stuff gets discovered, for some people, it's like, oh my god, this ruins the game. And which is, it's like, you might think that's silly, but, you know, this game has been being run for like 5 years, and they're, like, the elevation boosting is the main thing that made it as cool as it was, right? And it's like, they discovered spin to win, and it's like, is this game dead now? Like, is everything that made it cool gone? And that can be a disappointing thing sometimes. You know, maybe the Majora's Mask any percent was really interesting, and now it's like, yeah, we have Moonwarp, which is cool, but it's less cool, right?
Well, so you're saying like sometimes you can discover tech that almost simplifies the route in the process to the point where like it's not as it doesn't leave as much room for somebody to have to like spend time perfecting how they move through the thing, and it becomes easier to kind of just like get through areas that were very impressive to see somebody do optimally, and suddenly you don't see them do it anymore, so you're like, well, that kind of sucks because I really liked that.
Yeah.
And sometimes too, like with Ocarina of Time's 90% route, like no one runs it because it's absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely miserable run to do.
Why?
It's just so incredibly precise.
Oh, okay.
And you have to watch a 5-minute cutscene
Yeah,
every time you
that's
attempt it. So there's like lots of reasons, and there are totally times where a run will discover a new trick, or a game will discover a new trick, and it's like, well, this totally fucks our run, and it's like, what do we do? Like, and sometimes they're not easy to ban at all, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, it's like if you press crouch at this specific time, it does this weird thing. What are we gonna do? Ban crouching?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and another kind of parallel I've come across with like multiplayer games and games that are speedrun is that whenever a new multiplayer game comes out and it's like really big, I'm always really interested to see like what the high level professional level players are doing in the multiplayer game. What the way that people are fully optimizing the game, and like the way that they're going about doing stuff. And it's come to the point now where I've seen enough speedrun stuff I do the same thing with single player games when they come out.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see how people speedrun that game. Like when Mario Odyssey came out, that was like the first thing I was interested in seeing is people speedrunning Odyssey.
Yeah.
Because I was like, okay, cool. Like I want to see how people use the mobility in this game to get around and like fully optimize everything.
Right.
And so I have that same sense I had with like multiplayer games to see people fully, becoming at the highest level that I do with single player games too. So it adds that extra bit of like longevity to my interest in something, is that I get to explore it in other ways.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really cool. Before, I was probably like a lot of people before I really like saw speedrunning was, just somebody beating a game as fast as possible. Like, it doesn't sound that interesting to me. And like, I would always make the joke that racing games are just speedrunning games.
Right. I really do think people need to find a better way. Every time an old lady asks me, what does the icon on my hoodie stand for? I'm like, oh, it's this charity event I went to. And she's like, oh, what did you guys do there? It's like, what do I say? Playing video games fast? Like that's the dumbest thing I could possibly say to a 60-year-old woman.
You could just say you play video games. Yeah, you don't really have to specify anything.
Yeah, but she won't understand the context regardless.
Yeah.
It is really funny though, their reaction every time I say playing video games fast, because they go, oh, cool.
Cool. Well, I am curious to hear like, how was it going to a speedrunning event?
Oh yeah, sure. It was very interesting my first time because I'd never been overseas. Yeah, so it might sound really weird actually. I'll give this I'll say this before I talk about it really quick. Why the hell would I fly across the earth, right? Instead of just going to GDQ's like probably a $200 flight away from me, right? So most of the people I ended up meeting through speedrunning lived in Europe.
Okay.
So the main motivation for me to go to any speedrunning event was to meet the people I'm friends with online, right?
Yeah.
And it's a great place to do that. I got on a plane and I flew 12 hours, which is the longest I've ever flown before. And I felt horribly sick the whole time. So that was a pretty miserable part of it. But it was really interesting. I've had like some experience making friends online and meeting them in person, right? But not a ton, and not to that distance. So at first it was kind of surreal how like much I felt like I knew that person, just who I had never seen before in my entire life, right? But so like the first part is generally pretty chill. You just hang out with people. There isn't a lot going on, but it's pretty interesting, especially ESA. I think GDQ does something similar. They have a lot of like games set up. They have a cool like arcade machine set up that you can play. If you've been to like a convention, it is kind of similar.
Gotcha.
There's less going on, right? You're not going to go to panels. There's not going to be a big game room or a convention hall. But essentially, you walk into a room, there's a giant screen, and someone's playing a game on it, and you can sit down and watch. And I say it like, I'm giving a very uninteresting description of it, I realize now. Yeah. So, it's very, like, intense, especially at first. There's, like, it's usually a very dark room with a bunch of computer screen lights on, so you feel like you're in a rave a little bit.
Yeah.
But no, it's cool. It's really interesting to like be like, you know what? It's 3 a.m. I'm gonna go see what's on the big screen, and you just walk downstairs and there's someone speedrunning a game. That's very interesting. I don't know if you have specific questions. I can definitely answer that.
So did you yourself speedrun a game on the big screen?
I have not. I did commentary for some runs.
Okay.
So, but no, so like the 2 times I went, the main game I ran, the first time was Mirror's Edge, and I didn't really have experience with any other games, and you know, I suck at that game, so they're not going to take my run. Okay, I don't suck, right? I put a lot of time into it, but I'm not that great. So, and then the next time, I had learned Battle Block Theater with Sajiki. Luckily at that event was the dudes who had first place in the category round, so you know, at this point, yeah, I would probably submit a run, and I probably would get accepted. Just because I run games that are obscure and no one else plays.
Yeah.
So if you're out there looking for a way to get a run into GDQ, pick up some game that nobody plays and then submit it every single year, and after 7 years they'll finally accept it.
Yeah.
Or if you want the easier strategy, probably submit it to ESA and then fly overseas.
Then fly overseas, alright.
Yeah, ESA is generally a little more... This isn't a controversial thing to say. I'm not throwing shade at GDQ, just to be perfectly clear. This is just how it is. They're way more willing to accept people they already have experience with.
Okay.
Because GDQ's nervous about having someone come on and do a bad job.
Yeah.
Right? In my experience, ESA is less concerned about that. They're willing to take more risks. And that's sort of the same thing with like the marathon that we were allowed to run on their channel and probably will run this year again. They're sort of... And they knew who we were. Like, one of the nice things was when we originally like set out to make that happen, we had someone who was known in the community on our side. And they were like, well, you know, we kind of know this guy, we can kind of trust him, sure. But I think generally GDQ would be like, yeah, we're not letting you guys touch our channel, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah, my experience with gaming events is specifically just like 1 or 2 locals I've been to for like FGC stuff.
Gotcha.
Like I've been to, you know, just like Smash locals before.
Yeah.
I usually don't. One of the locals I went to, I didn't want to be in. I drove a friend there, but they had an odd amount of players, so they were like, "Come on, man, just play." And I was like, "Sure, fine."
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I made it out of pools.
Wow. That's great.
But I got eliminated immediately upon hitting the bracket. I think the first person I fought was immediately the person who won the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then the second person I fought was my friend who I came there with that wanted to compete. So I was like...
you made it out of pools.
Yeah, so I did.
You can always say that.
Yeah, I made it with a 2-2 record in pools, and that was enough to get me to do that. Because like, it was such a huge skill difference. Like, the 2 people who beat me massacred me,
right.
And then the 2 people that I beat, one of them immediately, the first thing he does is random, and I'm like, okay, so I randomed a character. And then like the second person I fought, like he seemed like he was kind of like semi-serious about the stuff, but he was just kind of like lacking some fundamental stuff. I didn't cream him, but I beat him.
What game was it?
I was
Smash
4.
Smash
It wasn't
4.
Ultimate, it was Smash 4, yeah. It was, at the time, that was the current Smash Bros. Game, and I had
It was shortly after launch, too, if I remember right. So no
yeah,
DLC
because
or
our friend
anything.
Jose really, he was an exchange student in, going to the same university as me, but he didn't have a car, so he needed me to drive him there, which I was fine with, so. But
Gotcha.
that's my experience, and, like, it's kind of crowded, a lot of screens everywhere,
Yeah.
kind of loud.
It's similar in some ways, yeah.
I'm sure it's not as loud at GDQ. I'm sure it's a lot quieter.
Yeah.
And like in speedrunning areas, because you're not like people are trying to record on the big screen and everything.
from what I've heard, the main like room is quieter generally at GDQs.
Yeah.
I know like this last year there were some issues where they had this sort of event set up, and it was kind of near the stream actually, and sometimes you could hear them like cheering for something totally unrelated. So that's like I said, ESA is sort of willing to experiment, and sometimes things go wrong. And but I respect that. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you have any questions about ESA, Alan?
I guess my question was, it in a like hotel kind of place where you had or like they were in like the lobby or conference area of a hotel is where they had it set up?
Yeah, so there's a hotel. It's called Quality View Hotel. So actually the 2 times I've been, there were 2 different places. The first one, I'm trying to remember the name of the city. I wouldn't be able to say it right anyway, so it doesn't matter because it's a Swedish name. But it was actually in a pretty small town. But what they had there was a giant stadium.
Oh.
And it was an indoor stadium, right? I have no idea what you played there, but from my perspective, you play video games there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a giant indoor stadium, and it was really interesting. So there was like essentially, it was just a stadium, right? So the center part of the stadium on that floor was basically everything. Yeah. Everything was there. The mainstream, all the side stuff, all the practice stuff. It was just all in that one giant room. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a huge stadium, right? Like not like a football field.
Yeah.
But decently big.
And it was all open air, like there was no walls blocking any of it?
Yeah, it was pretty much all open. The only other thing was that year ESA decided to try to do a second stream where there were 2 streams running at the same time. And so if you went up the stairs into like the stands, there was a side room where they had the second stream going on.
Okay.
This year, or last year, it was in a hotel, and there was the same this year as well, where there's essentially like a side big room where similar stuff is, like the stream and other cool stuff is going on, but then they have side rooms for like the quiet practice room, regular practice room, the second stream, that sort of thing. Yeah. So, and it was also awesome because they had an ice cream machine that was free to use. So
that's your favorite thing for me to say, the ice cream machine.
But I will say it's funny because it seems like they didn't warn anyone around the area that there was going to be a giant event happening because the McDonald's was always packed and there were always only like 3 people working there. And that's the worst Big Mac I've ever had in my entire life. The bread was like rock hard. It was so disgusting. So after that, I just tried to order the chicken nuggets and they were out.
Oh. So, was that the closest food thing? Was just the McDonald's?
It was like you walk out and turn right.
Yeah.
But no, there were some good food places there. I don't remember what this place is called, but they have like this. I think it's sort of a chain in like Europe where they sell like spaghetti and pizza and different stuff. But essentially, it looks sort of like a fancy restaurant, but also you like stand in line like a McDonald's, you stand in line and then wait for your food and then go sit at a table, but it also kind of looks like a fancy restaurant. It was very weird.
Okay. So, gotcha. Yeah. So were most of the people at the event from the area, like from that country, or were they from all around Europe?
All around Europe, mostly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so this summer, some of them, I can't go to ESA again, but some of my friends were talking about visiting and like coming through this area. And one of them's from Ireland, the other one's from Germany. So if that gives a little bit of perspective, but no, I have... At that event, Swedish friends, Finnish friends, Danish friends, some people from Europe, some people from Canada, interestingly enough. Yeah, just all over. I know there were some people from France, some people from Spain, just everywhere.
Just everywhere, okay.
Yeah.
So was there like... Did most of the people that you interacted with speak English, or what? Okay.
Pretty much everyone. I think especially because they're exposed to like the internet.
Yeah.
And like most people on the internet speaking English, so it's really, really funny. I don't know if you guys know the Rixer. He's like a decently popular runner. He's definitely well known in speedrunning, and he's sort of well known outside of it, but a little less so. You cannot tell he has an accent. And when I talked, I was talking to him a little bit, and he was like, "Where do you think I'm from?" And I was like, "I don't know, somewhere in America." And he's like, "No, I think he's Danish, yeah." But like, you can't tell. And I have another friend. You just can't tell, and it's because they grew up on the internet. Like, that's what they both told me. It's like, we grew up on the internet. So we mostly have, like, I wouldn't say our accent is very kind of it's not very obvious, right? If you're
Yeah.
from Boston, you have a very obvious accent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But here you have a very neutral accent.
So the Midwestern kind
Yeah,
of.
yeah. The Midwestern accent is pretty neutral.
Most of it comes from like terms and words used as opposed to like specific inflections on things.
And I've heard sometimes we don't say G's in ing words, which I never notice. But that's what people have told me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They lean up so hard that we just kind of drop them a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but no, both of them sound like they almost have a Midwestern accent. I could not tell. It was really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That is very interesting, yeah, 'cause to think that you went to a European event, which is like, multinational European, and then everybody there speaks English, and a lot of them just sound like they have almost like a Midwestern English accent. Yeah, so, and I'm sure they obviously speak they speak their own language probably more than they speak English, I would guess, but
Yeah, well, it depends on the person. So the two people I talk about, the Rixer and my other friend Kopax, they're both like, I would rather speak English than speak my native language. At least, well, from what I remember. Maybe I'm misrepresenting them. But when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, no, I usually feel more comfortable speaking English.
And then you said you had one friend that was from Ireland, in which Ireland is mostly English.
Yeah. So he speaks Irish, but not a lot. Because it's
you mean Gaelic?
Gaelic.
Okay.
That's what I meant to say.
Yeah. Well, Gaelic is, to my knowledge, not a very prominent language in Ireland anymore.
If you could get a whole podcast out of him just talking about this subject.
Oh yeah.
I was talking to him this weekend and he was getting really passionate about it. So it's a very interesting. Yeah. So I guess one of the things that's cool is I'm terrible, especially about geography. I'm terrible about I don't have a ton of knowledge about other cultures, right? So this is these are areas where I have very faulty information. I have but it doesn't bother me, and I don't feel bad admitting it. And genuinely, if we tried to do that thing where you label the 50 states on a map, I would probably get half, which is awful, right?
I mean, I'd probably hit half too. I'm not too good at that.
But that being said, it's been really interesting. I think the coolest way to learn about other cultures is to just meet people. You know? And I would never have the chance, but through speedrunning, it's actually opened up a lot of those doors. The coolest thing about speedrunning has been making friends.
I've heard the community for it is what's mostly really incredible. You talk the groups and stuff at GDQ, they talk about their Discord servers and stuff where people are just super willing to teach people. Everyone you said, you want more people to play the game that you have the world record in because you want to push how far it can go. So many people are like that with just the games they like and the games they run, that they want to see, the game constantly improve and people constantly play the game with them.
Yeah, I feel like I see that a lot in more smaller communities. Not necessarily entirely that small, but I see that a lot in mod communities can be like that, where there's a lot of people who really get to know each other through modding and speedrunning, and even less popular games. There's a lot of fighting games that are like that. For a long time, Under Night, before it really resurged massively in popularity from being one of the games at this year's Evo, yes. It was really mostly people on a Discord server playing each other, and Skullgirls is pretty much reduced to that point now. There's a lot of fighting games that are like that, and you see that with smaller competitive communities. But with the really, really big games, they're so massively popular and everybody plays them. The League of Legends, the Overwatches, the Dotas, the Hearthstones. That you can find communities, but they're inter-communities. They're local communities. They're really close to you and accessible because the game's so popular that so many people are into it. Where with something like speedrunning, that has to be even sometimes multinational because of the fact that it's not as wide and expanding.
Yeah, well, so it's funny because the first thing I think the first place I ever think I saw this was when I started getting when I was pretty young, I started getting really interested in skateboarding. It's same sort of thing where generally, it's kind of a competitive thing. You want to be better than other people. You want to show how good you are at the thing, but what people most want is for people to do sick stuff, Yeah. And that in some ways was really cool to see. And speedrunning can definitely show that same thing. I do think it's interesting. So there's definitely enough speedrunners that you see this segregation between people, right? Okay. And there are people. I've been bad about this in the past. I'll be totally honest. I can never possibly understand why someone would run a Pokemon game. I have no fucking idea. And that's the thing. I'm sorry if I shouldn't swear so
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, this isn't your mama's podcast.
Okay.
No, but yeah, we say fuck all the time and shit like that.
Okay. Yeah, no, I have no idea, and it's never something I've really understood. And you could look at it and say, oh, it's really cool, you have to adapt to RNG, and sometimes that's true, but it's like also sometimes you just spend 2 hours and you can't get a run because you get unlucky, right? And that's crazy. And in the past, I was like, oh, Pokemon's a stupid run. Like, you're kind of dumb if you try to run it. And I don't think that's true anymore. I actually kind of respect the people who put in that work and, like, see it differently from me.
Yeah.
But there definitely are people who have an attitude like, I don't want to throw shade at a community I'm in or anything. I think sometimes Mirror's Edge, like, especially being in that game, it's a really hard game. And, like, I know I've been emphasizing this over and over again, but it's probably, you know, if you could take 100 games and put them in a list of the 100 hardest games to be the best at, I would say Mirror's Edge definitely ends up in that list, right? I think sometimes people in that community sort of are like, oh, you run that game. Well, it's not as... It's kind of an easy game compared to this, you know? And things like that, where people sort of be disrespectful to the other communities a little bit.
Well, and that's universal in, like, a lot of competitive environments in general.
Yeah.
For, like, hobbies and for games. You'll run into people that, like, you know, I play Warhammer, and I've run into, like, communities that are like, oh, we only play War Machine. Like, oh, you play Warhammer. And I'm like, yeah. Like, okay. And then there's, like, you know, you have that with gaming all the time. Like, most people who play, like, League of Legends or Dota are just like, scoff at the other game. And I play both of them, and I just don't care.
Yeah.
And even, like, with smaller things and, like, the fighting game communities like that between certain fighting games, especially with Smash, and you'll run into people who just do that with pretty much anything. So that makes sense.
There's always going to be elitists.
It's interesting because even inside of a game, right? Like you'll find people who are like, oh, you play this character? Well, I don't respect you.
Yeah.
Fighting games, yes, absolutely. That all the time.
Especially.
Yeah. It's like, oh, if you play that character, you're garbage. Like it's don't do that. That's but I mean.
But sometimes it's true though. So.
I mean, you run into like what one of the most like prolific. You know, I don't play top tiers. People is like low tier god for a while inside the FGC, and like I don't think he gives a shit anymore. He'll play top tier characters now, I think.
Yeah.
But instead of being like a loyalist to the characters he likes, which a lot of people are, and a lot of people mistake that for like chasing the top tiers. It's just like, no, I just like this character.
Yeah.
But like he was. I don't play any character this top tier. I'm low tier god. And it's like it's almost this sense of I'm going to prove to you that I'm better than you, while also beating you with a character worse than yours kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, like, it's almost like, you know, I'm limiting myself and I can still beat you, and it's like this
it's
weird...
Like Naruto wearing like, weights on his
ankles. Yeah. When he takes them off and they're like, what? They're just training weights, and then just... giant explosion happens.
And then they pick Fox.
Well,
except low tier god does it and he still loses. So.
Yeah. Well, and that makes me think of the fact that... you have people who also, this is one of my favorite tropes you run into inside of fighting games. You beat them with a character, then they switch to the character you're playing.
That's great. That's great.
It's like almost this thing of like, I don't know if it's like they want to be on even grounds with you and they think, oh, well, if we're in even grounds, I can beat you, which like doesn't really make sense because your experience with a character is entirely different than somebody else's.
Exactly.
But or it's just
from places of
I think it's just disrespect.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna beat you with your own
character. Yeah, because they're
angry.
angry.
BS. And I'll show you that.
I'll show you how bullshit your character is. Yeah.
I do that. So I play a lot of melee, and I'll do that sometimes when I play against a Marth.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? I can beat you with Marth, and then I usually lose because I suck playing Marth. So.
Yeah, that's my experience with it. Is just, if you suck with the character, it's like cool, but it shows that like even characters who are top tier or who are like considered to be easy to get into or easy to win with still require a certain amount of effort to actually get there with.
Depends on the game.
Yeah, and I feel like that transmits over to other things, like even in the speedrunning community, you have to dedicate time to speedrun anything.
Right.
It doesn't matter how simple people think it is. It doesn't matter how like difficult something else is. You have to dedicate time to do this.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, to kind of disrespect the idea of somebody else dedicating that much time and, like, enjoying that, especially since you said before, it's about having fun.
Right.
So,
yeah.
That should be not so disrespectful to people, yeah.
That's the issue, is you get people who, to them, it isn't just about having fun.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's cool. I guess maybe in some ways for me to dismiss that, it would be the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, if someone cares a lot about getting the world record or being the best, that's great in some ways, but it depends on how they express that thing.
Yeah.
I've known people who, you'll do something to make a run better, right? This is just an example off the top of my head. I know there's a lot of contention about this topic, so I'm not going to say this would make the run better. But just for example, Super Mario Sunshine, there's like a 10-minute intro cutscene. But because there's a section of gameplay that's really small between the cutscene, another cutscene, and the main game, people don't want to skip it, right? Normally, a lot of the time when there's a long intro cutscene you can't skip, they would just start it from a save, but because there's gameplay, people have thought about this for a long time, right? But let's just say, in a perfect world, there wasn't really gameplay that mattered in that section. There are still people... One thing people might do is make a new category and say, okay, this is the category where you just don't play the cutscene. But there are some people who would say, well, I'm not going to run that category because it's not the main category, and I want my name to appear on the front page of this speedrun page. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Do you realize that we're talking about speedrunning right now? I mean, I say that, and I get into long arguments with people about what category names should be and things like that. So.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, because I mean, like, the idea of like having 100% and any percent and having those be the only two categories is kind of like, that's not broad enough to fit a lot of different like ways that you can go about things.
And just like a lot of the time, the any percent name is like universal enough that it's fine at this point. Everyone sort of knows what it means, right? But there's lots of times where people will call something 100%, and it's like, that's not how you define doing 100% of the thing. This is something that bothers me about Mirror's Edge, is our 100% run. You collect all the bags, right? Okay. But you don't finish all the time trials. So it's like, to me, how is that 100%? Why don't we just call it all bags? And I've argued this forever, but people are like, no, it's 100%. And it's like, well, I guess it is because you said so. So, and there are definitely other things. There's a Mirror's Edge category that I think is really cool that someone made called Inbounds, that there have been quite a few runs of. And essentially it's like, well, what we deem to be staying in bounds of the level, that's everything else is like, you can do what you want, And yeah, that's not a perfect definition, because like I'm sure someone will come around and say, I don't really think that strat is inbounds. But it's a lot better, I think, than 100%. Yeah. Because it's like, when you say 100%, you're really promising something, right? Yeah. And with a game like Super Metroid, it's fine to say 100% because there's a percentage count.
Yeah, the game counts,
right? But in this game, it's subjective to what you mean by like what is completing 100% of the game.
And I think that's true with almost every game. It's kind of crazy. Like, you say 100%, and sure, like, if we talked about like Grand Theft Auto 5, there would not be a comprehensive way to describe 100% of that game, because you'd be like, all main missions, all side missions, all mini games complete, like whatever. There'd be some super long name. So like, sure, yeah, say 100% there. But it's like, can't we just call it all bags? That's what we do in the run.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting, because that makes me think about like how one thing I would like to see happen more inside of a lot of like, especially like professional gaming and stuff like this. I don't like that people hone in on one thing, and that is the only way to do it.
Right.
Like one huge thing I love that's come up inside of like professional Dota is they have the Midas Mode tournament. And it's a tournament it's a whole different thing, where like the drafting system is all based on a currency system.
That's awesome.
That's based on like how strong the characters are. So like highly picked characters are more expensive, and lesser like demanded characters are less expensive.
Right.
And so like, and winning and losing gains and loses you money. So like, you want to maximize how you're spending your money and like maintaining it, while also trying to still have a comprehensive team that can win.
Right.
And it adds so much to the game. That's and it's really so cool, interesting. Yeah. And I really like that kind of stuff. But a lot of games, a lot of competitive games, just they have their one mode. This is how you do it, and they don't want to differentiate stuff. They don't want to try new things because they're afraid that like, if they try something new, it's not going to get enough viewership, it's not going to get enough attention, and then they're going to lose money.
Right.
Which is, understandable why they're afraid of that, but I would love to see more exploration in that kind of thing.
Right.
And even in like single player games, you have stuff like, the Pokemon community started doing the Nuzlocke runs, where it's a different way to go about the game, and it's not a speedrunning function, it's just a difficulty modifier.
Right.
It tries to make the game more difficult and more interesting in certain ways. And you have stuff like XCOM, where some people like to play it with Iron Man on, where you literally can't save scum. You can't load saves after bad things happen. And then there's people who just don't want to do that because they don't want to get screwed over by RNG and have to like start their whole game over.
But it's better to have more options than less.
Yeah, and I'm always a big advocate for just like more options and more ways to experience the games, because like, you know, the way that somebody likes doing a game isn't necessarily the way that somebody else wants to do it. And so like, you know, you should alienate people from a community specifically just because you think there's only one way to go about something.
So I actually want to say, because I realized I sort of talked about this whole naming thing without really talking about why I think it matters, because it's like, who cares, right?
Yeah.
Who cares if something calls 100%? But you'll actually see this a lot when we talk, and I'm actually going to follow up on what you were talking about in a second. I just want to make sure I explain this.
Go for it.
You'll see this all the time when we talk about a glitchless run.
Yeah.
As this happened when Ocarina of Time glitchless was showcased at GDQ. Ocarina of Time glitchless does a lot of things like bomb boosts. That like, is that glitchless? Is it a glitch? Is it cheating to use the bomb to give you more distance? You know, what do we really consider a glitch or not?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, there's not a clear definition, right? It's not easy to just say, this is a glitch, this isn't a glitch. And I think everyone can agree on that, right?
Yeah.
So I think you say, this is glitchless, and you tell someone who's never seen speedrunning before, and they say, oh wow, that's really cool. I would love to see someone beat this game fast without any glitches.
Yeah.
And they get exposed to that, and it's not what they wanted at all. And it actually kills any interest they would have had in that thing. In the same sense, when you say, oh, hey, do you want to see this any percent run? It's like, well, what are you talking about? What does that mean?
Yeah.
You know? And that's sort of the reason. And like, but a lot of these conversations I've had in the speedrunning community, people go like, well, we know it's glitchless, so it doesn't matter, right? And it's like, no, but it does, because people outside might be interested, right?
Yeah.
And that's the sort of where I see it affecting inclusivity, and it's very minor. I'll be the first person to admit that it's kind of a minor point, right?
Yeah.
It's, for some people, if it killed their motivation to play the game or be interested in speedrunning, it would have done it regardless of the name.
Yeah.
But I do think it's bad that we don't try to like fix things that might be problematic, right? Yeah. In the same sense that it's like, yeah, you can play the same game for 30 years, but maybe it'd be cool to try different things and try to mix it up. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely think that also comes in with like difficulty in certain games, is some people don't really like it when there's the ability to alter the difficulty in a game, because they feel like it detracts from like the way that the game is intended to be played. But like, really all you're doing is alienating an audience in that sense. And like, you know, like generally it's better to have more people love and enjoy this than it is to just like force it into a very, very niche like area. Like, you have something like Death Stranding that very obviously has like a niche audience that would enjoy playing it, but it also has a massive range of difficulty that you could do for the game, which, you know, doesn't stop it from being a very niche interest. Like, the difficulty isn't the sole reason people are playing that game. They're playing that game because of the actual experience.
Right.
And so, like, it's, you know, there's certain areas where, you know, I can understand not wanting to make cuts, not wanting to make changes, but there's others where it's like, you know, it's important that we let people see this and get interested in it.
So, yeah, so I think this is like, this all around is a really interesting topic, because I think that we focus on this topic like it's, well, what do you do to fix this? You add a difficulty mode, right? Mm-hmm. And that's totally an option. And that's totally fine. And if a developer wants to do that, I think they should. But I think, so my favorite game of all time is Dark Souls.
Okay.
And that's a game that notoriously doesn't have a difficulty mode. In fact, it's a game that sparked a lot of this discussion.
Yeah.
But I think the cool thing about Dark Souls, and the thing that it does so well, is actually it offers a lot of things that change the difficulty in ways that aren't through a selector.
Difficulty modifier.
Yeah, so like being able to summon other players, being able to use spells that keep you further away from the enemies, stuff like that actively modify the difficulty. And I actually think it's really interesting, because Sekiro totally fails to do any of that stuff and fails to have a difficulty mode. And I think it's totally a step back. That game's so much harder, at least initially, for anyone who's never played a game like that before. And I can totally see where people are coming from with stuff like that. When people argue about it with, like, specifically, like, Dark Souls 1, it's like, well, I sort of see less where you're coming from.
Yeah.
You know? I think that's interesting, though.
Yeah, and, well, when I think of Dark Souls, also, Dark Souls makes me think of a lot of the ways that, like, you go about doing speedrunning, or like you understand patterns and you understand like the ways that things are going to act and like how they're going to react, Because Dark Souls, a lot of that, like, you have to force yourself to understand it. It's almost like a rhythm game at some point.
Yeah.
Where you have to understand, like, all right, you know, this is the point in which the enemy is in a position where it's not going to hit you. You can get this many attacks in. Then you have to go back on the defensive and make sure that you're dodging and avoiding its attacks again.
Yeah.
So that's very... It's a game that forces you to learn and forces you to fail and learn from failure,
Right.
which I think is very important. So, like, yeah, I'm definitely not necessarily like advocating for the idea of like, well, you need a difficulty in Dark Souls, because I do understand that like not every single game needs a difficulty mod, or not every single modifier. Not every single game needs to try and like alter its difficulty. But I think when you're a developer, you have to look at how your game appeals to people, the reasons why it appeals to people, and try to like see what you can do to make it to widen the appeal a bit without like destroying what is the core demographic,
Right.
And what is your core audience, and like you're not trying to force your game to be niche for the sole reason that you want your game to be niche. Your game should be niche as a result of what really interests everybody about it, and then like you would hope that it would grow and be more popular, but it could be niche just because of the way that you created it.
Right.
So
Yeah. Have you guys heard of Pathologic 2? Do you know?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay, yeah. That's exactly what I think of. Is that's the game where people wanted a difficulty modifier, and they essentially said, like, the purpose of this game is to not be enjoyable.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think of when I was talking about earlier Death Stranding. It's one of those things where you don't need to make your game like it's important that you have a creative direction when you make your game.
Right.
And so like you don't need to make your game to appeal to everybody. You don't need to do that. And like if you have something in mind, that you have an idea and you have a creative process and you have like this creation you really want to produce a specific way, then do it like that. And that's the thing. Is Pathologic, again, like I've seen a bunch of videos recently about it, and it's all about forcing you, like there aren't shortcuts in it in certain ways. Like you have to walk everywhere, and you have like this basic walking speed, and you have to deal with like the fact that everything punishes you, and you'll probably reload a bunch of times.
You'll make one decision and it's a terrible outcome, and the other decision is also a terrible outcome, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah. You want it because sometimes also morally the good choice is the choice that fucks you over.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm going to help these people out and give them a bunch of food. Okay, cool. And you don't really get a reward for it.
Now you're starving.
Yeah, now you're starving to death. And you're like, well, shit, I could have just ran away with all the food, but like, again, then like you're looking at that as like a moral dilemma more so than an actual gameplay thing. Because like, yeah, strategically just leave with the food. Yeah. Like, that's what you should do, but... the
cool question is, can video games be more about just having fun then?
Yeah.
But this actually does make me think of another thing that I kind of assumed would come up, but I'll bring it up just because it may be interesting. This is a thing I hear a lot, is how can video games appeal more to speedrunners?
Yeah.
How can you make a game more appealing to speedrun?
Well, Ali talked a lot about Celeste.
Okay.
Yeah, and how they build in some sorts of like speed tech right into the game because they know that like a speedrunner might like it, or having good things like you've seen a lot of indie games do it where they have kind of like speedrun modes built into the game where they trim all the cutscenes. You just start right from when a speedrunner would start timing it, which would be point of like first input and stuff like that, and cutscenes won't play during the game. It'll just let you do all that without needing to skip pointless cutscenes and like menuing and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. No, so yeah, I do think that's interesting. So Mirror's Edge, the biggest glitch in the game, is something called the kick glitch. And essentially when you do a wall run, it's a first-person parkour game, if people haven't seen it yet. When you do a wall run, you can kick off of that wall. And because I think they had problems with people like wall running over a flat surface and then kicking and sinking into the ground a little bit, what they do is they actually put you into a grounded state for a single frame. And what that means is you can actually jump off of that during that grounded state for that one frame. So it's basically impossible to do on console because it's one frame. But on PC, you can bind it to your scroll wheel. So you can scroll on that one frame and jump. And that's where a lot of that's not it. There's a lot of nuance to Mirror's Edge, but that's where like a decent amount of the cool skips come from.
Yeah.
It is not easy to do. Like, probably learning to consistently kick glitch took like, even just, I don't think I got a kick glitch for my first like hour of trying it, right? So it is not an easy thing to do. The thing that's really interesting though is like, if they modified the game such that you can do that technique without any trouble. You just press a button and it works. I don't know if it would be as compelling or as interesting. Which is a weird thing to say, and I haven't really explored why that's true to me.
Well, we've talked about this with fighting games before,
right,
where a lot of fighting games have it where to do certain inputs, it's like a lot, it takes a long time to get down doing this input.
Right.
Like, for instance, if you're a Geef player inside of Street Fighter, you have to do, full circle turns to do some of your grapples, and for somebody just picking up that character, there's just no other character in the game with full circle turns.
Yeah.
So it's something unique to the character that you really have to get down. And I talked about how in Street Fighter V, Ed is a character who has low effort inputs, and that's his unique thing.
Yeah.
Where instead of having quarter turns or anything like that, he just pushes in a direction and presses the button.
Right.
Like Smash style.
Yeah, like Smash style. And so, it's interesting to almost take the difficulty of input within the game itself and make that differentiate characters.
Right.
And we've talked about, if we feel that would it be better to perhaps make it so that Geef's grapple isn't so obnoxious to input? And, do we think that would improve the game, or would that, pull away from kind of some of the feeling of you have mastered this, you've gotten this down, and you learning frame perfect stuff,
right?
Or if you should have it so that it's more about the player knowing the game and their opponent, and less about just if I do an input error that I'm screwed.
Right.
Yeah. So that's an interesting area to go into, and I never thought about it in speedrunning, but that is interesting, the idea of lessening the strain and the idea of how difficult it is to do specific inputs.
Yeah, I
right.
feel in speedrun, to some extent, obviously that's true for every speedrunner, but to some degree it comes from a sort of wanting to master a game, or at least know that you show a knowledge of its mechanics, which is what that technique sort of does. You need to know that for that one frame you're in a grounded state and thus can jump. I'd be interested to see why a community would want I guess the easier version,
Right.
Because it definitely would, it's a trade-off of, for the people who want the mastery, you do sort of, having a button input take away a bit of the mastery, but you also get maybe, I don't know the idea of how many, runs are lost to that, but you do get, way more runs that are, viable.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that I'll say is, the way a kick glitch works, the amount of height you get, the angle you get, the amount of speed you get coming out of it, depends on a bunch of things. It depends on the angle you come at the wall. It depends on how long you run on the wall. It depends on when you kick off of the wall, a million different things, right? So there's a lot of stuff to master there. And I would say, even now, I don't know everything about how to do a perfect kick glitch. Generally, I do. And if I wanted a specific angle, I can get a specific angle just by playing, whereas someone who's only put in 100 or 200 hours won't be able to do that. So it isn't just that single input, but it is sort of significant. And one place where it comes up is if I want to do a kick glitch on a wall on the right and get onto another wall and do a wall run, if those walls are really close to each other, I have to scroll my mouse, right? If I scroll too much, I'm going to immediately jump off the other wall I'm trying to wall run on. And that's something where, suddenly something that is a high execution, high difficulty, some people who are really good at scrolling that small amount will have a higher consistency on it. It's everyone can do it,
Yeah.
And in some ways, we've gained something in that you won't lose a run to it. But in other ways, we've sort of lost something where it's this thing that was, that showed off how talented you were at this sort of skill, which is weird to say because we're talking about scrolling a mouse wheel, but it suddenly lost something, right? And now, even sometimes, a big strategy that'll happen is crazy kick glitch chains, where you'll kick off of a bunch of different walls, because when you're in the air, you don't lose speed, right? Mm-hmm. So you can just keep going faster and further. And definitely with something like that, with just a single button press, that stuff would become a lot more feasible for someone.
Yeah, it wouldn't be quite as impressive and almost this thing that somebody looking out from the outside looking in is I'm so far from being able to do that, but they can eventually get to the point where they could.
Well, I think the funniest part about it too is the only way you possibly know how difficult or how what that person's really doing is you have to start playing the game and start trying that stuff, and then you can really see it. But anyone who's watching who's never really tried to do a kick glitch before, it's they're just flying, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with a fighting game. It's if you've never played a fighting game before, it's oh, he did the grab.
I mean,
it's you don't see a quarter circle, you don't see a full circle.
Well, and you also experience that with when Sonic Fox won like a year ago when Sonic Fox won the Esports Player of the Year award, there was a bunch of people who were like fans of the other players that were like, you know, in the position that they could have won. I think there was like a CSGO player, and like their whole fandom of like that was like, they're like, oh, she's just button mashing. And like, you know, it doesn't, what he's doing doesn't take any skill. He's just button mashing. It's like,
that's how you win the best fighting game player. You just button mash.
Pretty much. And it's like it's this almost like, even just between games, people don't really understand the level of difficulty it takes. Like I remember, I had a friend who I grew up playing real-time strategy games with him.
Yeah.
I grew up playing like Age of Mythology and Dawn of War with him, and then when I started playing MOBAs, he saw that as just like, oh, that's just a dumbed down version of an RTS. Like that's just like, you know, an easy mode version of an RTS, and like he didn't understand like the specific nuances of what you do inside of a MOBA and like how you work with your team and like different things. Like I mean, even what I like to play Ember Spirit inside of Dota 2, and he has like a frame specific. You have to use his ability where he disappears and slashes everybody in an AoE, and you chain that with using an ability where he has to be next to you to activate it. And for that 1 second, he's next to you, and so you have to do that exactly succinct with each other to make it so that you can actually land that at a distance instead of landing that when you're directly standing right next to them.
That's cool.
So there's like that small tech that everybody who plays that character has to get used to doing. Right. And then, for instance, Monkey King, for a while, they nerfed it. He had the ability to turn into a tree or like just transform,
right? Just
because they wanted him to have that. Well, they added a frame of invulnerability when he does it, and because of that, it was literally like professional players would dodge huge amounts of like nuke damage because they would just frame dodge it with the ability.
That's awesome.
And so like there's
the frame perfect null damage.
Yeah,
interesting in a
it was just, and even with an item like the Manta style in that game, I've used that before where like. I was fighting somebody, and they were about to hit me with their ultimate, which is just a point target nuke. And then I pressed the button the immediate moment I thought they were going to do it, and I dodged it because I didn't exist for that 1 second.
Yeah.
And not even a second. And so I was frame perfect with that, and it made me avoid all of that damage. And there's those small little nuanced things that a lot of people from the outside looking in have no idea even exist in the game, and they have no idea like what challenges exist within the game and like different things that people have to do. And so between communities there's just a huge thing of like you need to
there's so many like I would say like even a mid-level player of most games can't begin to comprehend what's going on in a professional player's head when they're doing a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's so complicated. If I'm like a mid-level Dota player and I look at a professional Dota comp, I might be like, oh yeah, this is why they're doing this strategy instead of that. But it's like they don't really know, right? There's so much going on there.
Yeah.
And then you go to like, oh, I'm a League player, or even like I play StarCraft, and I look at Dota and it's like, well, this is dumb, and it's because I don't get it, right?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest problem genuinely is that we all know, sort of unconsciously, that there is some skill differential between these games. We don't know what it is, and it's impossible to quantify, but there are certainly some games that are harder than others, so we can always use that to justify that we know which ones are which, right?
Yeah.
And I can say, like, well, look, maybe I don't know exactly how hard Dota is, but I know my game's harder, right? So like I can say bad things about it because I just know that's true, but you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there is that element where it's like.
And it's the skill too. Like they require different skills. Like a StarCraft player requires like micromanaging and all that, these kind of things that like they have their subtle moments inside of Dota. You have characters who have certain like small micro elements. Like League of Legends completely got rid of that.
Yeah.
But Dota still retains it. But like it's nowhere near.
And they would look at that and be like, "Oh, Meepo, like what an easy character to
play."
play." Yeah,
pretty much. And like whenever I bring up Dota and like a moment of just me looking at two players and knowing like their skill level was, I was watching it. It was an Ember Spirit fight a Monkey King, and you know the two characters I mentioned earlier, and they're both mid and they're fighting each other, and the Monkey keeps canceling his staff slam repeatedly, trying to force the Ember Spirit to try and dodge it with his sleight of fist, which, you know, makes him disappear for a second. Right. And he's just canceling it, and the Ember just knows that he's trying to bait it out of him. Yeah. And then eventually, the moment he finally goes to actually do the staff slam, he has enough reaction time to just dodge it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is something I would never be able to do. I can't time these things that's like perfectly to know, like, oh, as soon as that exits a specific frame, I know he can't cancel it anymore and it's going to happen.
Right.
And that's a huge thing in fighting games, too.
Yeah.
And that's just insane. Just the amount of work people have to put in.
Same with speedrunning, too. The amount of work people put in to get such quantifiable results.
Yeah.
Like, say, like, some section of a run has, like, maybe, like, 5 frame perfect tricks, like, next to each other. This is just a hypothetical game.
And you know that if speedrunners were making as much money as esports players were, you'd say the same thing that you see with, like, you know, professional esports players. Like, the person who won the Esports Player of the Year award this year was, you know, the teenager that won... the Fortnite tournament.
Yeah.
And, like, the news media immediately upon hearing that and, like, interviewing, they're like, oh, I guess I'm going to go play this game. Like, you know, oh, winning at a video game, that doesn't, you know, that's not that doesn't seem that crazy hard. And, like, if esports was treated the same way that speedrunning is, you'd have people being like, oh, you just beat this game really fast? I could do that. I want to make that money.
You'll get people coming in all the time in YouTube comments and they'll be like, yeah, I've beaten this game faster than this. And it's like, dude, this is the any percent world record. There's no... It's like, no. I've dealt with people who are like, I have a better time on this time trial. And it's like, then post your videos.
Then record it. Go do it again.
Yeah. Like, if it's so trivial for you, why don't you do that? No, it's really funny. But it's like, yeah, here coming, all right, we've got a big trip coming up. I've got 3 frame perfect inputs in a row, and everyone watching is like, I don't know if this guy's telling the truth. Like, and that's why whenever I do runs, I make that stuff up all the time.
Well, and I love that there's like the recent series of videos that people have been doing of like,
oh god, the
American Dad intro, where they're just like, this is my American Dad intro speedrun, where it's like in-depth discussion of like, oh, at this frame you need to do this, and it's just complete bullshit. It's just so stupid. But that makes me think of like, man, real speedrunners can completely do that. They can just be like, yeah, right here, there's a frame perfect.
You see it happen like GDQ all the time, where just like some person on the couch is joking like, yeah, that was frame perfect, or like, I remember they fooled people with like a Mario Maker speedrun of like doing a blindfolded really hard level, but they were all automatic levels where you don't input anything, Mario will just automatically do the trick. And it was like seeing like when the joke would like go, when someone would just, you know, remove the wool from your eyes and being like, yeah, this was all just a joke.
Yeah, gotcha.
There's I think it's like DreamHack Montreal 2017 or something. One of the people in this Mirror's Edge speedrunning community, they did a run where the entire time, every single trick we do, they just called it something different. It's this thing called wall boosting, where you essentially jump into a wall to get a wall run and look into it and jump off of it immediately. And for whatever reason, that builds up speed. Couldn't tell you why. It makes no sense. But the whole time they were like, "Yep, a big wall rub coming up right now."
Well, I've seen the Smash community do that before too, where it's just like they're like mix-ups. They're like, you know.
Yeah, there's a picture. There's a picture out there. I think I've seen it mostly in relation. Yeah, I guess the Smash community in general. But it's like hand warmers. I think that's what they call it in FCG. No, they call it something else, right? Or do they call it hand warmers?
Specifically, what are you referring to?
Like before a match. Just like warming up.
Warming up and like the stretching the hands. I'm not entirely sure.
I don't think they call it hand warmers, but in Smash they call it hand warmers. It's put as hammy whammies, I think. and then it's like a reed is called a guessy.
Yeah, guessy.
And then a double layered reed is called a messy guessy.
Yeah, it's just like these dumb things where they rename things just to mess with people. Yeah, and I've heard a couple of those. So I do want to ask you, what is it like speedrunning with a person? So like doing a co-op speedrun as opposed to singularly doing it by yourself.
It is interesting. So you'd think there would be a lot of communication going on. Especially like I have a lot of experience playing Counter-Strike. I probably have 800. I almost have 1,000 hours in Counter-Strike. So in that game, you have to talk all the time, right? You have to make sure you know where people are, what they're doing, you're talking to them, you're communicating. Speedrunning is not like that at all. A lot of the time, when we're really taking it seriously, we will not say a single word to each other. And that's because you know what's going on in their head. Like, you've played with them enough that you understand what they want and what they want to do. And you'll get into a scenario you've never been in before, and instead of saying, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, it happens too fast, right? So you're just like, I think they're going to behave like this. and you have to react to that. And that's really cool, actually, when it works out. 90% of the time you mess it up. But
well, yeah, and that's super present also in PvP games with the fact
that's
that, like,
true.
You have when people are in a team together, they have to have a certain amount of, like, unspoken knowledge of each other, where it's like they know that this person would do this, and they kind of, like, follow up. Like, even when I play with my friends, at some points I don't, like, yell out when I'm going to use my ultimate on somebody in Dota, but I'll just use it, and then they know to follow up.
Know,
But there's also tons and tons of doing callouts, like you said in Counter-Strike, where it's like, hey, this person just picked up this item, and, like, things that get information that you're giving to the rest of the team to make sure that they're aware of it, because not being aware of it could cause the game to, go to the enemy's side, pretty much.
But yeah, thinking about it, you're right. In those moments where you don't have time to react, like when a fight breaks out in Counter-Strike or a team fight starts in Dota or League or something like that, people don't talk, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it depends on the team.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it's like, I know I have to trust that they're going to do what I think they're going to do, and I need to do my best to fit into that, right?
Yeah.
And it's totally the exact same. Yeah, I would say actually the parallels between, like, competitive PvP games on teams and co-op speedruns are almost identical.
Okay, and so, like, do the two of you generally, like, agree upon, like, okay, we need to start over, or, like, do you just deal with whenever you mess up and stuff like that?
It depends, definitely. There are times where we'll mess up big enough and it'll be early enough in the run. So Battle Block Theater is about an hour and a half long, so it's like, do we really want to reset 45 minutes into the run? I don't know. But it is funny, though. This is just kind of a more general thing about speedrunning, is you'll see people who will reset over and over and over again. And I know so many people in Mirror's Edge who have, like, an hour-long time, or, like, 50 minutes. And I totally get it, because I was there for a long time. I've got about a 35, just for perspective, right? And it's like, these people think, like, a big mistake that cost them a minute is unsalvageable. And I can tell you that person could continue the run in PB by 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and even at their skill level sometimes, it's like, if you just finished this run, you might get a 6-minute PB. And that's true, like, even with me and Sajiki, the guy I do Battle Block with. It depends, we sometimes know, but generally, especially with speedrunning, if you're not at the world record level, you can probably PB most of your runs.
So what do you mean by the term PB?
Personal best.
Okay.
So we can beat our previously best time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a fair amount of, like, in most of the videos I watch of somebody, when they beat their record, a lot of the time, they mess up multiple times. Like, they're going through the run, and they're like, oh, I didn't get that, and it's going to cost me this much, and, like, they're constantly throughout the whole run complaining about the mistakes they've made, and they get to the end of it, and they're like, holy shit, and they beat their last run.
Yeah.
They beat their personal best, and, like, seeing that is always really funny, because it reminds me a lot of, like, sometimes how people will be about pretty much anything, where, like, I've seen people be so self-deprecating about, like, when they're trying to get better at something, to the point where, like, they're scrutinizing and criticizing just the smallest little mistakes and details, and, like, it can be good, because you can,
Usually
pretty
it's
much
bad, though.
but usually the biggest issue with it is that you need to understand, like, you've made a mistake, you did that, but you need to keep moving, because that by itself, in isolation, will not cause everything to fall apart entirely. Yeah, so and that's like a big reason why I try to avoid, like, being frustrated with people and being, I don't rage at people, because if people make mistakes, and I fully understand that, and, like, just because somebody made a mistake doesn't mean that, like, everything's fucked. And even if everything is just fucked and over with, it's like, well, I want to focus on what I personally have done in this game. I don't want to focus on everybody else exclusively.
Right.
And, like, if I feel I performed well, I shouldn't feel personally bad about this game.
Yeah.
But to some people, especially those who chase MMRs and, like, they chase brackets. They chase trying to be the best in the leaderboard or something. They're very, very willing to, like, get very, very frustrated at, like, things like that, So, they'll just get extremely angry. So, I did want to ask you this. What is your opinion on Mirror's Edge 2?
Catalyst?
Yes.
That's not Mirror's Edge 2.
That's
my opinion.
That's your opinion? Okay.
No, it's okay.
I wasn't sure if you were saying, like, it literally isn't called that.
No.
Is it called Mirror's Edge 2?
No, it's just called Mirror's Edge Catalyst.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they want to do the reboot thing.
Okay.
So, Catalyst... Alright, here we go. So, Catalyst clearly tried to do some things right. I think, overall, it's a very okay game. If you liked the first Mirror's Edge casually, you'll probably have fun with Catalyst casually. That being said, I don't think the speedrun's super interesting. sort of what we were talking about. There are actually a lot of cool strats now. They've found a lot of cool stuff. That being said, I think a lot of what made the original Mirror's Edge really cool doesn't apply to Catalyst. One of the interesting parts of why, because I assume this is the nitty gritty of what you're interested in is it a good speedrun? It's a fine game. Go ahead and play it if you like the first Mirror's Edge.
Okay.
I don't think it's a great speedrun. And there are some people who really love the speedrun, right? So I don't want to sit here and go like, oh, shit, it sucks.
Yeah.
If you want to speedrun it, don't. Just go get a real job. No, there are some people who really love the run. So if you're interested, like, go check out those communities, look at the run, see if it interests you, and then do it. But from my perspective, it's not a super interesting run, especially not compared to the original. And so one of the big things about the original, the thing that makes you a better player versus someone else is your ability to maintain momentum. In Catalyst, if you press the right button, or the right mouse button, you immediately go up to full speed.
Oh, okay.
So anytime you make a mistake, anytime something small happens, you just get back to full speed. There's a lot less nuance in the movement. There is sort of a wall boosting thing, but it has less of an impact. There's nothing like kick glitching. So a lot of the big skips are just like, there are some cool skips. I actually do enjoy watching Catalyst runs when they're on. But yeah, that's the main thing. Is like a lot of the minor stuff where this will happen in Mirror's Edge all the time, where a guy with like a 50 time will go, I don't know how to improve my time. What new strats should I add? And I will say, nothing. There's nothing you should add to the game. You need to play it more, right? And I think that's a little less true in Catalyst. Actually, that's quite a bit less true in Catalyst. There's just less ways to screw up the movement, and there's less ways to master the movement.
Okay. I was going to ask, just for like a frame of reference, you said your best time was 30-something on Mirror's Edge?
It's like a 35-40.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the world record currently?
Oh, the world record currently? I think it's a 28-17.
Okay, so the difference is 6 to 7 minutes.
Almost 10 minutes.
Oh, wait, almost 10 minutes, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. It's crazy. It's insane. So, I'm at a 35, at about 35th place, I guess. I think you don't start seeing sub 30 times until 10th place. Okay. Maybe even lower than that. So, for a long time, probably until 3 years ago, people weren't even sure if anyone would ever get a sub 30 time.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's so hard.
And you're just probably seconds away from being higher in the ranking.
Yeah. So actually, there's a 40-second time save that's not very hard that I could do in my run that I don't do. There's a thing called Beamer where if you turn around on the specific frame that a wall climb pushes you out because the wall geometry changes, you can get a huge speed boost, right? And you can use it to skip about 40 seconds in one of the levels, and I hate it because I can never get it. And I actually like started grinding it out, and I was gonna go for a run with it, but I kind of stopped trying at some point. But it's very, very funny because I don't use it. There's two big tricks called cannoli and called 3A3C. Yeah, and both of those tricks are very hard. And what you'll find is someone will get like a 40 time, and they'll be like, all right, guys, I'm going to learn cannoli. My run doesn't have cannoli. It doesn't have 3A3C. It doesn't even have Beamer that I mentioned. And I have a better time than some of the people who try to do those things. And it's like I said, a lot of what makes the game cool to me and hard is the minor stuff rather than like some big trick.
Yeah. Well, and that's always something interesting I run into where I run into people where they're like, there's this time saver I could do, but it could fuck over my whole run, so I don't know if I should do it because it's really hard to do. And I run into that like a fair amount of times when I watch some speedruns. So I do want to close out by asking, what are some of both of your personal favorite games to watch get speedrun?
Mirror's Edge.
Understandably.
I think genuinely, Mirror's Edge is probably one of the best speedruns just at all to watch if you're interested. Mm-hmm. If you don't mind people using glitches, that is the best thing that you can watch. That being said, Jedi Academy is also a really, really awesome run that a lot of people aren't aware of. You know, obviously you have the big things. I think Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask now are all very interesting. But for stuff that's like pure movement, specifically Mirror's Edge and Jedi Academy are both really, really awesome. So please check those out.
Are those specifically PC runs?
Those are specifically PC.
Okay, yeah, because we didn't really get into the factors that like, the format you play the game on is usually a big deal. I think most communities probably they don't usually divide it based on like what format people are using. I think everybody just congregates to the same format and everybody uses that one format.
It depends.
It depends.
A lot of times it's like if it's a console game they want like original hardware. Sometimes you get exceptions if it's like a GameCube game being played on a Wii for slightly better frame rate stuff. Sometimes they do. I'm not sure if virtual console stuff are broken up like by category or not. I think it depends on the emulation.
Yeah,
quality.
like I know Ocarina of Time allows like emulator runs on the leaderboards, but only if you don't have like a top 5 time or something. Yeah. So do you have any?
As far as games, I really like seeing Celeste. Every time that game, like seeing the improvements that game makes, especially like even if you just look at the 2 different GDQs it was featured at, where they had I believe it was first the race between what was first and second place at the time to this past year. The improvements are massive and it looks so impressive. Other games are just games that I love, and they might not be the most fun speed games, but I just love seeing them. Like Metroid Prime, any Donkey Kong Country Returns game, those are probably the ones at the top. Super Metroid's a classic. I like randomizer runs too. Actually, I think the on the fly routing part of runs is super impressive. That you have to get with a randomizer, or sometimes you see it. Sometimes they do specific seed randomizer runs. I've seen that with Dead Cells too. That was also pretty impressive. And I also like weird categories, like bingo categories that they usually have in.
Those are cool.
Like Mario Sunshine Lockout Bingo they had at GDQ a few years ago, and that was one of my favorite runs of that GDQ.
Yeah, I like to see the Mario games, definitely. I like platformers tend to be like the ones that I'll watch the most of.
Monkey Ball, I forgot.
Monkey Ball's
always a fun one.
Monkey Ball's a lot of fun to see. Yeah, I was gonna say Monkey Ball, and then like a lot of the time I'll just be like nostalgic for a game. I'll be like, I remember playing this game when I was a kid. I wonder if there's speedruns of it, and I'll just go look up that. So that tends to be what it is. So, well,
can I plug one final thing?
Yeah, for sure.
About it. So if you want to see some wacky runs, definitely look up Hekathon, Hek-a-thon. You can figure out the rest. So we have the Run Live, the world record for 10 pencils drillless IRL. So check that out because that was a lot of fun. The same guy who ran that, he's a great guy, Zuketra, shout outs to him. He did a Nintendogs run that you should definitely watch because that's also really awesome. And if you're interested at all in Mirror's Edge or Jedi Academy, we did relay races for both of those games. So I think 10 different players for both games racing on 2 teams against each other.
Okay, cool.
And for the Mirror's Edge one, I did commentary, so obviously it's a great run to watch.
Yeah.
So definitely
that's the only reason why you're plugging it.
No, of course. Shout outs to ESA. Hekathon will once again happen this year, so please keep your eyes open.
You said you have had 2 hackathons already?
Yeah.
And this will be the 3rd?
Hopefully.
Okay.
I haven't talked to anyone at ESA yet, so maybe they'll tell me to F off, but we'll see.
Alright, so is there anywhere people could go to either watch your runs or see some content you've created?
Sure, yeah. You can go to my YouTube channel or my Twitch channel. My username is Shafournee. You can spell it Shafournee.
We'll also put a link inside the description.
Yeah.
No, that's all they're getting.
That's all you're getting. Yeah, so, alright, so if you want to check out Shane's stuff, go ahead, and thanks both of you for meeting today.
Yeah, of course.
It's always nice to have Ollie, and it was good to see you, Shane. And
not always nice to have me, though.
Usually. So, I hope that everybody who's watching enjoyed the content, and we'll see you all next week, and have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day.
Goodbye.